Welcome, everybody. My name is Courtney Ness-Fuchs. I am the Assistive Technology Training Specialist with North Dakota Assistive. And joining me today, I have Jamis Warenberg with the Minnesota STAR program. I will let
Hello,
Jamis
everybody.
say hello.
Yep, I'm Jamis. I'm an assistive technology specialist with the Minnesota STAR program in Minnesota. Glad to have you here today.
Yes, we are very happy to have you join us to talk about Digital Accessibility 101. I am going to put the link for the slides in the chat function. You should be able to click on that link and access a copy of the slides. They will also be mailed out to you after the presentation. This is going to be recorded, so if you miss it, no problem. You can come back and watch it again. All right, just a couple of notes as we get started. If you'd like to use captioning, there is built-in captioning with Zoom here. To access that, what you want to do is go to in your Zoom window, you're going to click on the three dots that say More. From there, you can hit Captions, and there should be an option to turn on those captions for you. When we do post the recording, that version will also have captions. And then if you'd like to pin our videos so you can see Jamis and I the whole time, to do that, you click on the three ellipses in our image. And from there, you should be able to select pin from the drop-down menu.
Hey, Courtney, there's a question from Lynn. If that is a question, is that something that we can allow her to talk? Lynn, do you have a question?
Lynn,
No,
do you have a
maybe not.
question for us? Might have just been an accident.
A mistype. You could also put it in the chat, Lynn, too, if you have a question.
Oh, she muted herself, so I'm going to lower her hand.
No question, she says. Okay, thanks, Lynn.
Okay, thank you. All right, so Jamis is going to be moderating our chat today, and he will do his best to answer any questions you have that come up. I will also be here to hopefully can answer those questions, and we'll get started, okay? So today's webinar is on Digital Accessibility 101. This is a real basic introduction to what digital accessibility is, who uses or who benefits from digital accessibility, and then some quick tips to get you started. So today we will cover a general definition of digital accessibility. We'll cover some different ways that folks with disabilities access digital materials. We'll look at common barriers to accessibility and how to fix them. And then we'll give you a list of resources to help you get started creating accessible materials on your own. So a definition of accessible digital materials. Accessible digital materials provide equal experiences of content to all consumers. So everyone is able to enjoy, to consume that content that you have created equally. What is accessible digital content? Accessible digital content is able to be consumed by everyone, regardless of the ways that they access it. Accessible digital content is required by law for federal agencies and recipients of federal assistance under sections 508 and 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. I am not a legal expert, so I'm not going to say for sure if it applies to your organization, but I have included a link to section 508.gov. They have an article to help you answer that question if those section 508 and 504 standards apply to you and your organization. But mostly accessible digital content is good for everyone. It's the right thing to do. And it also can increase your company's search engine optimization and access to your business for all consumers. So what are some ways that people with disabilities access digital content? There are many types of ways that we can access digital content. Standard, we might look at it on our desktop computer and use a traditional mouse and keyboard. We might look at it on our mobile phone or tablet, and we scroll using finger gestures or voice control. A blind individual might use a screen reading software such as JAWS or Windows Narrator. So those programs will actually read out the whole content of the screen. And the way we order our content makes a huge difference for if they're able to navigate that content. Someone that has fine or gross motor impairments, they might use a keyboard to navigate instead of a mouse. So it could be just kind of a standard keyboard, could be a large keyboard with key guards, could be a specialized key guard or keyboard, but it doesn't matter. They use a keyboard and they use tab and arrow functions to move around. If you've ever had a mouse that's broken, you might have to do that as well. Or if you're in, get in that dreaded blue screen and you have to navigate through, you might have to use your keyboard to navigate. Someone that has severe cerebral palsy might use accessibility switches instead of a mouse or keyboard. So they actually click a switch, maybe using a head array on their wheelchair. Maybe they use a sip and puff switch, and that moves them through the different actions they can take with their digital materials. Similarly, someone with ALS might use an eye tracking software. So they have a program that watches their eyes as it moves back and forth and where they focus on, and then make selections that way. And then lastly, seniors might have severe arthritis and they might need to use a touch screen because using a traditional mouse is too painful for them. So there's lots of different ways that we access our digital materials. Likewise, there can be a lot of barriers to accessing content. So I have an image on the screen, and this is of an excavator. It's removing debris from a landslide that has come down from a mountain and completely blocked the road. So we want to unblock the road, or ideally create content without any blocks in it to begin with. So I have listed today just some common barriers to digital accessibility. These are not all of the barriers. This is not meant to be a high level understanding of digital accessibility. This is just meant to be an introduction. So these are some of the most common barriers that we'll see. The first barrier is content that isn't properly structured. So it has no format and no direction. So you're in a town and there's no street signs, nothing. How are you supposed to find where you're going? It might have content that someone has, instead of using the column feature to create two columns, they've used tabs. And that's created in illogical content, or it's difficult to understand for somebody who uses a screen reader. Content that isn't properly structured can also look like forms, where you should be able to tab through to the next field to enter it. And instead of tabbing from the first name to the last name field, you tab from the first name to the signature field or something like that. It doesn't have a logical structure. Another barrier to accessibility is difficult to read font and odd text spacing. A third common barrier is when folks use color as the only means of conveying information. So let's say there's a field that is required, but the only means someone has used to denote that is by coloring the text red. That's the only method. A similar item is having inadequate color contrast. So inadequate contrast can be very difficult to read, if not impossible for some individuals. A fourth one, or fifth, I should say, is when we have non-textual elements such as images, charts, graphs, graphics, illustrations, audio files or video files that do not have a text alternative for their content. So an audio file, for example, that doesn't have a written transcript. If you aren't able to hear that audio file and there's no transcript, how will you know what the content of that is? And then lastly, another common barrier is using language that's too complex for the audience. I thought about using the term verbose or loquacious instead of too complex, and I didn't, because those would be too complex. Okay, so I've moved to the next slide, and I want to talk about when we're creating accessible materials. It is the best practice to start with accessibility in mind. It is so much easier to start with accessibility in mind as you're building your materials than it is to go back and remodel brick by brick or element by element of your materials to make them accessible. Now getting into the issues, those common issues to accessibility. First one I have is lack of structure. So to illustrate this, I have a picture of a street sign that has the saying, "Where am I?" And it has arrows pointing in the 4 cardinal directions. So how are you supposed to know where you are or where you're supposed to go? So a lack of structure has content that doesn't follow a logical order, or it's not tagged properly to have a proper order. So you can't navigate it. If you aren't able to see the screen, for example, and you use a screen reader, you can't see that signature field is down at the bottom, and that's where you want to go. And then you can't find the content you're looking for. I wanted to give another example of to help you imagine what that might look like. So I have brought up a PDF of a diner menu. Okay, and it has listed different types of breakfast and lunch foods and some desserts, and they're just listed on this menu. They're not in any order. There's no structure at all. And if I asked you, if you're a sighted person, if I asked you, what are you going to order? And you know immediately, like, it's lunch, I want a grilled cheese and tomato soup. You would want to be able to navigate to that quickly. So you'd probably look at a menu and look for sandwiches or look for soups. But on this menu, you'll have to read through every single item. Likewise, someone who uses a screen reader and accesses a document that doesn't have structure, such as this, would have to sit and listen to every single item on that menu. And if that were me, I'd find that pretty darn frustrating. Not to mention the cognitive load of having to remember everything. And it might just disenfranchise me enough that I say, phooey, I'm not gonna mess around with that. So I'm going to show you a better example now of a menu, that same menu that has proper structure. So this is the same menu with the same items on it for breakfast and lunch and dessert. But this time I've structured it so I have a heading for breakfast, and we can see 3 options listed under breakfast. The heading for lunch and dinner, and then there's a subheading or subheadings for soups and sandwiches and salads and sides. And then lastly, there's another heading for dessert. So it's so much easier for me to find what I'm looking for, because I know when I go in that I want to find that grilled cheese and tomato soup. That's what I'm craving. So I know immediately I want to navigate to the sandwiches item. I also have up on the side of the screen, I'm in Adobe PDF, the navigation menu. So in this menu, I can choose to expand those different heading levels. So I just expanded the lunch and dinner heading. And then under that, we have some subheadings. So I'm going to expand the soup heading. Well, I can't expand it, but I could navigate immediately to it and see, okay, yes, they do have tomato soup for me today. So think about this example as you're creating structure and why it's so important to have a logical structure to your documents or presentations, websites. Okay, so how do we fix a lack of structure? To start with, you can use an accessible template. The Microsoft Suite has accessible templates available for Word documents, for PowerPoint presentations, all sorts of different types of media. And there's many available for different applications. Those accessible templates already have a structure that is built in and you can use very quickly. Another way to fix this is to make sure you are using appropriate heading levels. So the first level of our headings, I'm going to go back to that menu option. Our first level of headings is breakfast, lunch, and then desserts. So those are our top level headings. And then under lunch, we had a heading level 2. So a subcategory of soups and sandwiches and salads. So use appropriate heading levels depending on where you are within your item. A third way to fix this is to make sure you don't use tabs or spaces to create the illusion of columns or lists. Instead, use the built-in bullets or numbering systems. And also you can modify the number of columns you have. So if you want to have your information presented in 2 columns, modify your document to have 2 columns instead of using the tab function. Someone who uses a screen reader and is consuming media that's another person created using the tab function, instead of hearing soups in column 1 and then tomato soup in the next column, if there has been a tab used to create that second column, they might hear soups, tab, 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 however many you used to create the illusion of a second column. So it really wouldn't make sense, and it could be really frustrating. So,
Hey, Courtney, we have our first question that came in.
sure.
Lynn is asking if Google has templates.
Sure. So Google does have some templates. I'm not as familiar with Google as I am with Microsoft. So I can sure try and help you find some accessible templates if you want to email me, and we can work together on that. But that's a very good question. Okay, and then the last thing you can do to make sure you have proper structure in your document is to verify the tab order. So this is so important for screen reader users and for folks that use a keyboard to navigate. You should be able to tab and it'll go in the correct order that you as the designer, the creator intended. Okay. I've moved on to the next slide and I'm going to talk about our second issue. This is about difficult to read fonts and spacing. So this first slide, I talk about fonts that are hard to read. There are some fonts that are really difficult to use for many different people. One example is script type fonts that try and emulate handwriting. These can be very hard for a lot of different types of people. So don't try and be fancy with script fonts. And then other types of fonts that can be really hard to read are ones like Curls and Playbill, Old English and Papyrus. So leave these fonts in the past. They were really fun, 20 years ago, but there is better design you could do that is still accessible to your users. So these fonts can be very hard to read, if not impossible for some users. I'd encourage you to stay away from them. Second part to that issue is having difficult spacing or inconsistent spacing. This can be especially difficult for users with dyslexia or who experience visual stress. So when we justify text to fill a full column, for example, it changes the spacing between the words to fill that text. So there's not a consistent amount of space between each word. Instead, it might be, say, the appearance of 2 spaces in between one word, and then 4 spaces the next line down. This can cause a lot of stress for someone who has dyslexia when they're reading, and it can cause a phenomenon called rivers of white. So the image on the right side of the screen is a picture of a text that has been edited, and there are markings showing a river of white, is what it's called. So these happen when text is usually when it's justified to fit a full column. And the rivers, it's an illusion that's created because of this spacing. It can be very distracting. Oh, I did have an exact definition. Gaps in typesetting, which appear to run through a paragraph of text due to a coincidental alignment of spaces. If you want to talk about being verbose there for us, or too complex. Okay, so how do we fix this issue of having text that's difficult to read and spacing? To start with, use simple, familiar fonts such as Arial, Calibri, Helvetica Neue, and Verdana. Make sure you're using at least size 12 font, preferably higher. In your design, make sure you keep the number of fonts and different font sizes to a minimum and be consistent with that. Avoid long segments of all bolded text or all uppercase text. And instead of using justified text that it changes the spacing between words, always use left alignment for a large block of text, or you can use center alignment, say if you're doing a caption for a picture or something like that. Yeah, moved on to the third issue, which is using color as the only way of conveying information. So why is this a problem? Because not everyone perceives color the same way. In fact, most of us don't. So according to the National Institutes of Health, 1 in 12 men and 1 in 20 women in the US have some form of color blindness. So this is, you're born with it, there's a genetic component. They don't perceive color the same way. And there are different types of color blindness. Similarly, our ability to perceive color and contrast can decline with age. And then it can also be affected by eye diseases such as cataracts or glaucoma, macular degeneration, or other diseases like Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, or if you experience an eye or brain injury, those can all impact your perception of color. And then even people without color perception differences might not be able to discern meaning from your content based on color if that document is printed in grayscale. So how do we fix this? You can still use color to convey meaning. You just need to use another method as well. Okay, so you can use color and any of these other methods, such as bolding your text, italicizing it. You could use underline as well. If you are on a web page My understanding is that it's generally understood that a underlined item on a web page is a hyperlink, and it would best be avoided to use that as a means of conveying information. Because most folks think that it is a hyperlink. So keep the underlining, just keep that in mind if you're using underlining to convey meaning. You could use asterisks or asterisks, which is multiple asterisks. So if we have a required field, we might have that required written in red with 2 asterisks. So we've used color and asterisks to convey meaning. And you could also try increasing the text size of that specific word you're wanting to emphasize. There's a quick check you can do to see if you're using color to convey meaning, and if you've added another method of conveying that meaning. So in PowerPoint, you can put your PowerPoint into grayscale quickly. You do this by going to the View tab, and then there's a color/grayscale section, and you can select grayscale, and it will become very apparent to you right away if color is the only means you've used to display information. Similarly, you can have your document and have it go print to PDF. So to do this, I have a screenshot here of how to print PDF from a Microsoft document. So go File, Print, and then from your printer options, you would select print to PDF, or it could be Adobe PDF. And then under settings, you would select grayscale. So there should be typically 3 options. You have color, black and white, or grayscale. Select grayscale. And when you do this, you'll get a quick visual look through to see if you have used color as the only means of conveying information. All right, I've moved on to the next issue, and this is similar, and we could use some of the same tools, but it is having inadequate color contrast. So on the screen, I have 6 examples of different text color on backgrounds. So on the left side of the screen, I have 3 text boxes with dark blue backgrounds. At the top, we have a medium blue text on a dark blue background. And the text reads, "Is this medium blue text on a dark blue background easy to read?" For me, it's not. Underneath that is a dark blue box with lime green text. And it says, "No, how about this lime green text instead? Is it a little better?" And then finally, on the bottom, we have that same dark blue, but a light blue font in it. And it says, "How about this light blue text on the dark blue background?" It's definitely easier to read, right? So, and then on the right side of the screen, we have a light blue background with different color fonts as well. So the top box is a lime green text in that light blue background, basically saying, is it easy to read? For me, it's not. The middle box says it's a medium blue text on that light blue background. It's a little bit easier to read. And then the bottom box is that light blue background with dark blue text. And it's by far the easiest of that column to read. And that's because that dark blue text on the light blue background has the best contrast ratio. So even if you don't struggle with contrast, normally think about when you are in a really high light situation. Okay, so we go to the lake a lot in the summer, and I know I should be enjoying winter, or, not winter, but sometimes I look at my phone when I'm at the lake, and it's really hard to read what's on the screen, even with my brightness all the way up when there's poor contrast. So if that kind of helps you visualize contrast at all. So how do we fix these contrast issues? Firstly, we can make sure we're following the WCAG, I think that's how they pronounce it, contrast standards. So WCAG or WCAG it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And these are international standards for web content accessibility. And they lay down different contrast ratios that you should use to ensure you're meeting accessibility standards. So they have 3 levels of standards. They have level A, which is the lowest, level AA, which is the medium, and then level AAA, which is the highest. They don't technically use the term color contrast in the writing. It's very technical writing. They talk about luminescence and the difference in the brightness of colors. But most of us think about it as color contrast. So WCAG 2.0, which is the level AA standard, which is used most frequently around the country, states that we should have 4.5 to 1 ratio for our standard text. And that's at the bare minimum. We want to have a 4.5 to 1 ratio of text colors. We cannot round up. So if it is 4.48, that is not 4.5, and it does not meet the standard. So keep that in mind, 4.5 to 1 as the contrast ratio, as the bare minimum. On the right side of the screen, I have that 4.5 to 1 written in a lime green text box. And just to give you an idea that the contrast between that black text of that 4.51 to 1 and the lime green background is a 9.18 to 1 contrast ratio. So most of us can't do these summations in our head. But fortunately, there's some really great tools out there that are free that allow us to perform color contrast checks. So the first one I have is WebAIM. They have a contrast checker on their website, and you can enter the foreground and background color. They have an eyedropper tool, so you can navigate over to the different colors on your screen, and it will pull up the hex codes or the color codes for those. And you plop it in, and it'll tell you your contrast ratio. And then lower down on the screen or on that page, it'll tell you if you're meeting the WCAG level AA, level AAA standards with those colors. A similar color contrast checker is the TBGI's Color Contrast Analyzer. This is actually a program that you can download for Windows or Mac. Again, it looks at those foreground and background colors. You can enter hex codes. You can use your eyedropper. This could be a good tool for designers because a lot of times you can just modify your color just a little bit to get the contrast that you need. And that tool allows a little bit greater flexibility with that. And I'm gonna actually take, sorry, I can't pull from my notes and drop them in the chat, but those are 2 free tools. There are links in the presentation for you. You can go to them, or you can just search for them. I'd highly encourage you to bookmark them. I use them all the time. Okay. So
Courtney, you're
our
about
next,
halfway through, just so you're aware.
thank you. I'll have a drink then. I'm a little over halfway through my coffee. Okay. So the 5th issue that we often encounter is having non-text elements that do not have text alternatives. This phrasing can be a little difficult to understand. So non-text elements are anything that isn't text in your content. So it could be an image, a picture, an icon, a graphic, an illustration. It could be a chart or a graph. It could be an audio recording. It could be a video that doesn't have captions. Or it could be a video that doesn't have properly described visual content. So those are some different examples of what a non-text element is. Anything that's not text needs to have a text alternative. Why? Because a screen reader will read that text alternative for a person who is blind. So it will tell them that they are looking at, say, a picture of the Eiffel Tower and it's nighttime and the lights are going off and it's glittering, if we have added proper alt text. Otherwise, all they'd hear is image and not have a clue what that image is for. So how do we fix this issue? This is a huge area of accessibility, is having text alternatives to non-text content. You could easily teach a 3-hour seminar on alt text for images alone. I have written alt text for 10 years. It can be very difficult. So I will not deny that it can be difficult, but it is the right thing to do and we need to do it. So that being said, there are some really incredible resources online where they tell you, what is really alt text, a great definition of it, and then give you clues for how to write alt text. So how to describe, say, that image or chart for a person. When adding a description, you need to, of a picture or chart, you need to think about the context. So one common example is there's a little magnifying glass to indicate that there is a search bar, and that's where you search. So in the context of that web page with the search bar with the little magnifying glass next to it, we would want to put search as the description of that image, not magnifying glass. Likewise, if we're talking about, let's say we're looking at Van Gogh's Starry Night, the context you need to describe that in is different. So if, for example, you are describing a picture of people observing Starry Night in a museum, and that's what you're just describing, that there are all these people observing this picture. That is one way to describe it. Another context, it might be an art student who needs to describe the colors in depth and the painting techniques, and their contexts are quite different. So when you are describing an image, think about what the context is, what meaning that image is trying to convey. Okay, so alt text, it can be hard. It gets a little bit easier, but it is the right thing to do. And there are some very gifted individuals out there. I try and imagine when I am writing alt text, how I would describe something to a relative, say I'm in the 1800s and cameras aren't a big thing. They live out in the country. So how do I describe something that they have never seen in a way that will help them envision what that item actually is? So that's some a thought that helps me when I'm writing alt text. I'm going to move on from alt text and talk about audio recordings. So if there's just a recording of audio, it should have a transcript. Otherwise, how is a person who cannot hear going to know what the recording is saying? How are they going to be able to consume that same content? They can't. And then for videos, you should always have captions available. And there's lots of softwares that can add captions for you that you can go back and edit. YouTube, if you upload to YouTube, will automatically add captions. Don't rely on the automatic captions for YouTube. You need to edit. just, yeah, you really need to edit them, otherwise they might not make any sense. And then audio descriptions are like alt text for video content. So if you are a blind consumer of media, and you're listening to the video, but you can't see the images that are on the screen, say it's a movie, an audio description will tell you, okay, we are set in a forest here. There are deer off in the distance, and there is a hunter crouched down with a bow and arrow ready to shoot. So a sighted user would be able to see that on the screen. A non-sighted user hears that audio description and they know the context of where that is happening.
Courtney, we have a question from Lynn asking if we have software names. Lynn, do you want to maybe expand a little bit more on what software you're looking for and for what particular function? That might help us narrow it down. Otherwise, everything she's talking about does have links to it that you can click to.
So while waiting for Lynn, I'm going to go to the next page because I think that might help a little bit. Okay. I came to the second to last slide for us. Actually, this is our resource page. And so this has some softwares for you, Lynn. So starting at the top, I want you all to check out Minnesota's state IT services program. They have done a great job of putting together accessible resources, describing what accessibility is and why it matters. So just open that screen up here in my web browser.
Courtney, we use this a lot to just reference and keep ourselves in check as state employees as well. So it is a very, very useful reference. Thank you for including this.
Yeah, thank the state of Minnesota for having such a good reference for us. I actually looked through a lot of this as I was preparing today's presentation. So that is the Office of Accessibility through the state of Minnesota's IT department. And there are some quick cards, Amy tells us. Oh, there we go. So same website here. They have created accessibility quick cards for some different programs, such as Adobe Acrobat Pro, Microsoft PowerPoint, and Microsoft Words. So that looks like a great little resource right there to help you get started. Other resources that I want to make sure to highlight are North Dakota Assistive's website. We have compiled some accessibility resources that others have put together. And then the AT3 Center, which provides technical assistance to Assistive Technology Act programs, such as North Dakota Assistive and Minnesota STAR. They have 3 digital accessibility courses currently available that you can take that perform a deep dive into different topics. So I'm going to enter that link here just to show you these self-directed accessibility courses that you can take on your own time. There are 3 courses, like I said, available right now. They have accessible web page design and content. Then I move my mouse too much. Web accessibility testing, which is a basic course. And the 3rd course they have is accessibility in Microsoft Word. And I understand that they're going to keep adding more courses as they are created. The next resource is from WebAIM, which is Web Accessibility in Mind. This is kind of a technical assistance for how to create accessible web content. They have deep dives into all different areas of web accessibility. So you can start at kind of a basic level, and then as your understanding increases, go to that more technical level. And they also put into layman's terms the WCAG standards, so the Web Content Accessibility Guideline standards that are international standards for web accessibility. So those WCAG standards were created by an organization called W3C, and this organization is actually created by the creator of the World Wide Web. So I've just entered their website, and they have the web accessibility standards. They have it all written out. This is a much more technical perspective that can be a little hard to digest or comprehend if you aren't a real technical user, if you're not an IT user or IT person. I'm not an IT person. I do struggle to read some of this content, even though I'm familiar with a lot of the concepts. So that's why I put it furthest down on the resource list, but it's still a great resource. Okay, so we're gonna end a little bit early. I didn't know how in-depth we would need to go without going too in-depth for a 101 course on digital accessibility. I hope you found this helpful. Remember, when creating accessible digital materials, start with accessibility in mind. It benefits not just users with disabilities, but everyone. Consult your resources, and one of those resources is your state assistive technology programs. So again, North Dakota Assistive for North Dakota, Minnesota STAR in Minnesota. I have links to our websites there that we will send out in the slides. For North Dakota, our website is ndassistive.org. For Minnesota, it's a little bit longer of a web address. You're looking for the Minnesota STAR, STAR program. It'll get you there. So I hope you found this helpful. We will have some additional digital accessibility courses in the future, so keep a lookout for those. And we will email you out a copy of the slides and a link to the recording when it is available. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or we can unmute you and do our best to answer.
Hey, Courtney, I just want to get your opinion on something. So
Sure.
oftentimes I will utilize, like especially with Microsoft Office, the accessibility feature that's built into Office 365. Have you used that, and what are your thoughts on it? I have some opinions on it as a user, but I just was interested to see if you've used that and if you would recommend that to this group as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yes, I have used that built-in accessibility checker from Microsoft. So they have it in Word and PowerPoint, and now on Office 365, I think it's on most of their online applications. I do find it helpful for catching things such as images that I forgot to put alt text on. I like to use it to check my tab order to make sure I can properly tab through a document, such as someone who uses a keyboard might do. And it helps with some real, most of the basic issues that you might encounter. It can't check for contrast. So that can be an issue, is you have to do a manual check for contrast, but you can use those free tools from WebAIM to do that.
Thank you for answering. It's kind of the same alignment that I was thinking. It does give you kind of a basic start. I mean, it's a place to start, I think, to kind of catch some of the basic things that you would need to update. But yes, it doesn't capture that color contrast and different things that you talked about today. So Just want to highlight it. It's just a quick, easy feature too that people can, as long as they're using PowerPoint, why not turn it on and utilize it as, like you said, as you're building it, so that you have less work in the end.
Yeah, I always have mine on. I had to learn the hard way, take things apart brick by brick, and you only do that so many times before you figure out, I'll just start with this turned on for me. Another thing
Any,
I'm sorry, James.
I was just gonna say, if there's any other questions, please feel free to put it in the chat. We still have a couple minutes left, so feel free to do that.
I was gonna say another thing that checker can't recognize is if you have too complex of language. So that's really up to you as the creator and knowing your audience. If your language should be at about an 8th grade level, I think I missed a slide maybe. Yeah, I did miss a slide. Oh, look at that. Sorry, everybody, I missed a slide about having too complex of language. We don't want to have too complex of a language for our audience. Imagine trying to read a research paper that's written for doctors, and you just need to know if it's good or bad to take vitamin D in the summer. You're not going to be able to perceive that language the same way because that's maybe not your area of expertise. So when writing content, make sure you keep your audience in mind. If you can, avoid technical jargon. Try and use simple, plain language and be concise. Keep your sentences short. And then when writing for the general public, they say to write to a grade 8 level. So an 8th grade level is kind of the base, and there are readability statistics that you can get. So I've just highlighted Microsoft's. They have a built-in readability and level checker that can tell you, okay, your writing is at a 11.9 grade level. And if it's for the general public, let's go back through and see how we can simplify that language.
Amy's also recommending the Readability app.
Oh, great. Readability app. And I am drawing a blank that app kind of does the same type of thing. It tells you what level your writing is at and if it's easy to understand. Is that right? Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Amy. That's a good one. Does anyone else have any questions? If you do, please feel free to, give us a call, send us an email. We'd be happy to try and help you find the answer. Thanks for joining us today. I'll give you back 6 minutes of your lives and have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Bye-bye.